when I received Edgar Shield's letter, I was absolutely amazed at what he was doing, and this proposal, which hopefully will include all the models right the way through, will undoubtedly be of great value to present owners and future owners of Alvis, because so far as I know, nothing of this kind has been done for any of the other makes of car which now make up the old car movement, so that to have the comments of the owners of today as well as the road tests of the past will make a very complete history.
Let me introduce Chris Taylor to you. And Chris, well, I don't know if anyone knows more about the Firebird than you do, but could you tell me what interested you in the Firebird? What attracted you to the Firebird in the first place?
Good question, Edgar. Right, I've owned my Firebird for 21 years.
Yeah.
We've had nearly 100,000 miles together. Endearing, faithful, fabulous machine that Alvis built.
And that's a purely unbiased viewpoint.
No, it's absolutely biased. Has done nearly 100,000 miles in one. I've had the head off once, and that was just after I bought it.
What would you like to say about the performance of the Firebird in the year 2007? On the motorway for a 70-year-old car?
50, 60 miles an hour, absolutely wonderful. Yeah. We've come up here in this today, 4 men, 4 adults, no petrol's been put in it. Now I don't doubt Mick started with a full tank, but no petrol been put in yet. And I assume we'll probably go home and it'll need somewhere. No, I think it'll get back to Blackburn. I'm sure it will. Yeah. I think it will get back to Blackburn.
And how about the braking, the gear change? How do you find all these characteristics?
Well, right. Let's talk about the legendary gearbox, shall we? It's never been surpassed. The finest all-synchronous gearbox that's ever been built. Because as somebody back in the 30s said, it's real synchronized and hasn't got these ridiculous modern things called balking rings. Balking rings won't let you have second gear if the car's going too fast to let you. This will.
And it's synchronization to all 4 gears.
All 4 gears. Revolutionary. Gearbox that will never go wrong. Cost as much as an Austin 7 nearly. But a fabulous piece of machinery.
And the steering?
Steering. Wonderful. Very positive. We're hearing scare stories at the moment about steering boxes that are breaking up. And of course we are now getting a balance of articles in the bulletin about whether they are breaking up or not. Well, of course they weren't made by Alvis. They were Miles Weller. Miles Weller were a steering box company that made, I think they're called Adamant Engineering, I think. They didn't make rubbish. And I think, we've had a chat over lunch, haven't we, about this. I think it's probably true that we should probably have them crack tested. But I will, I think, yes, a crack test is worthy.
And finally, about the brakes.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Look at them. These brakes pulled up a 32 horsepower car. And whilst all right, they put a servo on it, they are the same brakes as the 32 horsepower 4.3 litre. They are probably the most powerful brakes on any pre-war car in the country.
But for an entirely mechanical cable brake system, the braking performance is remarkable.
Oh, absolutely.
I know my last MOT chap
remarkable.
Almost threw himself through the windscreen. He got such a shock at the way that the car took.
That's right. I mean, there's a lot of things that you perhaps can learn little bits about the fact that you should have, and it is really important to have the same size drums on any one axle. Yeah. And by this I mean drums that have been machined out. So you should really match them in pairs so that the angles of the pulling arms are equal on each axle.
Yeah.
And I think it's also very true to say that the smallest drum should be on the front. Yeah. Now this is something that I'll bet nobody's even thought about yet. But the angle of the floating cam lever is very important because that is your mechanical advantage. And I do feel, rule 1, match pairs on any one axle.
When I was adjusting my brakes, I followed it by the book, but then I realised that I hadn't slackened the cables off enough to put the lever back to its original position.
It's in the drum. This lever we talked about, it's in the drum.
Yes, if you do that, you don't get the action of the brakes, and you think the brakes are absolutely
rubbish.
Terrible.
If they are set up correctly, they are so powerful. Yeah. They're really good.
Yeah. Okay.
Are you happy with that?
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Interest in the Firebird. I'm not going to say love, because I'm not really sure whether it is a love relationship or an interest, but I tend towards the love. Started when I was even in my early 40s. I was in Round Table, and one of the members, he used to tell me about how his father had this Firebird saloon. I had the TF in those days, not the one I've got now, another TF. At any rate, we kept in touch with this chap's father. The old boy died, and I was given the chance to buy the car. Stopped in my garage for about a couple of years until I decided to take the body off. The reason the body was going to come off, A, it wasn't very happy, and secondly, I had, like so many pre-war saloon owners, thought, well, it'd be rather fun to have an open tour. I know. And dare I say, even the chairman of the club had suggested it wouldn't be a bad. I know, I'm not going to mention his name for fear of offending him, because he's a lovely chap. We took the body off, and I set about restoring the chassis. Got the engine out, had the engine sent down. I took it down to Brighton to an engineering firm to have the engine fettled. I like engines, but I thought I'd have it done professionally. The figure which was going to cost me to restore the saloon or to have the replica body on, it would have been cost much more than the car was worth. So he brought the car back to me. Body was off, as I say. And then all the rotted wood appeared. And I still remember now, about 5 o'clock one Saturday afternoon, going off to a local town to buy a bandsaw. And having got that, I then started making up the rear arches with laminate. Shortly, the body became solid and ready to put back on the chassis. Anyway, we got to the stage where all the doors opened and closed beautifully, and about 1991 or 2, grand start-up day, as I mentioned in a bulletin article a couple of years ago, only to find that a crack in the head suddenly opened up. I knew the crack was there. The engineers had said, oh, he could weld it, it'll be all right. And it went bing, just like putting hot water into a glass container. So it was then a question of finding another head. Dear old Tony Philip Smith of the Bulletin, whilst we're away on an Alvis holiday, phones my daughter, who phones us. Tony Philip Smith says he's got a Firebird's car for sale with a spare head. And so he put me in touch with Captain Herbert, who's sadly since died, a chap who lived up in the Wirral, and I bought the head, subject to it being crack tested. I needed a little bit of stitching, and so I was able to get the engine running.
I have always been interested in sports and sporting cars, and my motorsport magazines certainly date back to the early 1950s, and I've always kept that interest, but I have to say not necessarily Alvis. I have a broad interest in vintage cars, and for 25 years I had a Riley Sports Racing Special. Sorry to mention the word special, but it was a terrific car. And I thought that when I retired I might go back into competition and do some more hill climbing. But when the time came, I thought, no, I'm not going to go back there again. So I was looking at the magazines for a pre-war tourer of sporting inclinations. And I saw this car advertised down in Cornwall and thought, that'll just do me fine. It could have been a Sunbeam or a Lagonda Rapier or something. It happened to be an Alvis, and that's what took me into the Alvis owners. And I'm delighted it did, because this particular car was just exactly what I wanted. Something you could go touring in, you could in some comfort and with a definite sporting inclination. But once I had the car, I then became aware of this extraordinary attitude there is in some quarters of the Alvis owners, that the Firebird is a dog. And this is just complete and utter nonsense. This car is 73 years old.
Yeah.
And how people can start talking about split seconds to 60 in cars that are 70 years old is beyond me.
Yeah.
It may matter if you're going and buying a new Subaru or something like that now, but it's totally irrelevant. And if you think about it, of course, when I say it's 73 years old, I saw the film Red Genevieve quite recently, and I was struck with the fact that the Dirac and the Spiker were 50 years old at that time,
Yeah.
when the film was made. So the car suits me very well indeed. Don't quite understand the performance aspect that people talk about. I suspect people who say this have actually never driven one. Geared, it does almost exactly 20 miles per thousand revs. And if you're cruising on the open road, you're easily able to keep up with traffic. Most of us nowadays have self-imposed limits on revs, and I tend to keep it about 3,500. So I mean, you're just about 70 or under 70 at that, and that just seems to me to be fine. Now, of course, as you know, I've got another car. I've got the TF, the fisherman's car, and I think that the Firebird and the TF is a magnificent combination. And if I could actually say something about the value for money, both cars together still probably wouldn't buy a Speed 25. Now, which would I rather have? A choice of cars or something like a Speed 25? And to me, it's no contest at all.
The Speed 25 loses, probably.
I'm afraid so, yes.
So you and Jean have both been very enthusiastic members of the Alvis Owner Club. Did it come as a surprise to you, the social aspect of it?
Oh, very, very, very much so. I think every club has its own characteristics. It doesn't matter what the club is all. And we found that the one was the Alvis owners. Probably especially up here, I think, because it's a relatively small group. Was quite extraordinarily friendly and became a very important part of our social scene.
Yes.
Edgar asked me to say something about the performance of the Firebird, and I think probably the best way is to just fit in the Firebird into the Alvis history. And one has to go back to 1930, by which time T.G. John had a very considerable lead in the use of front-wheel drive, all-independent suspension, and powerful 4- and 8-cylinder engines, which were certainly, in terms of the power they produced, were up to continental standards. As far as the public was concerned, the vintage movement and the vintage car was then becoming less acceptable. People wanted more saloons, they wanted easier steering, they wanted better brakes, and the vintage period was therefore coming to an end. At that point, as far as Alvis were concerned, the thing which they did, which could have led them along another route, was to produce a twin overhead camshaft engine, which was put into a saloon and was designed by William Dunn, of course, and was presumably approved by T.G. John, and would have been really aimed at a different market. because this was a car with a maximum speed of about 90 miles an hour. Whereas up to this point in time, in the first 10 years history of the company, 12 horsepower producing 70 miles an hour evidently satisfied everybody. Not surprising when most of the traffic moved at about 25 or 30 miles an hour on winding, narrow roads. So maximum speed really didn't come into the picture very much. The company then moved over to the SA Firefly and the SA Speed 20, which are the dividing line really between the vintage and the post-vintage periods as so far as Alvis are concerned in design terms. The Firebird, of course, was now a more luxurious car. It had the weight of this all synchromesh gearbox, which Alfa Varni designed, and a considerable number of improvements, so that Alvis then ended up with a car which, in the case of the 1.5 litre Firefly, weighed 26.5 hundredweights. They've now gone to 27.75 hundredweights. And as we know, most of the criticism of post-vintage cars is that the manufacturers lost performance through the 30s, making a vintage car very often a more desirable possession. However, in the case of Alvis, they then dealt with this by uprating the engine from 1.5 to 1.8 litres, and they followed this size right the way through with the 1270, with the TA14, until production of four-cylinder cars ended in 1950. However, as we all know, Alvis engines will produce a lot more than the manufacturers found at the time the cars were road tested, and this year being the centenary of the opening of Brooklands, of course we all remember C.J.H. Dunham's Special 1270, which made the fastest lap in the last race at Brooklands at 109.94 miles per hour. So had there been no war, Alvis certainly had in that engine an engine for which the performance potential could have been considerably increased if the market demanded more than 70 miles an hour as a maximum for a saloon of this price. So that's where that seems to fit together and put the Firebird into the story. So those are a few thoughts at the time on the Firebird, and hopefully put the Firebird into its proper context. We should always remember the experts said Alvis never built a bad car, and certainly the Firebird was the start of their four-cylinder range, which went on successfully until 1950.
It happened when we were both at school at Kilmarnock Academy in, when was that?
Long time ago.
1959, nearly almost 50 years ago. And we decided that old cars were the investment for the future. And the first cars that we looked at were Rolls Royce. And Ian will tell you about the Rolls Royce that we tried to buy.
Edgar saw this Silver Ghost with a saloon body, I think it was a Hooper, in a scrapyard, so every day we went round to see it, and we said to the guy, what do you want for the car? £75. Oh, that's a bit rich. So every day we thought we'd go around and beat him down. Unfortunately, we never beat him down, so I went back and tried to buy the radiator and the masket, and he said, that'll be £25.
For a Silver Ghost radiator and masket. After that, we discovered this Alvis Firebird Holbrook saloon, very similar to Mick's one, YS8291.
Yeah. And Paisley police car.
Paisley police car. And we bought that car between us for £25.
Yeah.
When we bought it, actually, neither of the two of us had a driving licence. We didn't know anything about cars. We gave the scrap man his £25, and he was taking the car back up to Darvel for us. And we noticed the blue smoke coming from the exhaust. and we were a bit concerned that after 10 miles in the distance from Kilmarnock to Darvel, the car consumed a gallon of oil. And so what we did, we worked in the car, we took the engine out, and we had to replace one of the pistons. Your father got one of the pistons welded up. And we put a new clutch in it, and after that the car ran for 5 years. Hold on, right, we'll just start. Mick Fletcher, who's going to tell us a little bit about his Firebird.
Yeah, this is a standard 1936 Firebird Holbrook saloon. I've had the car now approximately 10 years. I bought the car in an original state, unrestored, which apart from cleaning the car up, I ran up to about 3 years ago when I had it repainted due to an accident at the back end. But up to then it was still the original car as it was. Somewhere in its life, prior to 1952 when it was taken off the road, it had had the sunroof removed and just the fabric top taken the full length. Like I said, the sunroof was taken out somewhere between 1936 and 1952, but the boot is quite spacious in so much as it goes a long way back, but also comes right up here, right up to the bottom of the back window, and if you pack it carefully you can get an amazing amount of stuff in there. The sunburst pattern carries on onto the back door, which then when you look at it from the centre, it gives the appearance that it carries on from the front right round to the back from the centre pillar.
Yeah.
It's basically as it was, apart from the original clock was missing and the original fuel temperature gauge, so I've just supplemented those with more modern Smith's gauges. The engine is the 1842cc version, the final development of the original sort of split three ways 4-cylinder engine, which started with the 1250.
You've got your water pump which is attached to the end of the dynamo.
Yeah, they fitted a water pump. That was one of the changes from the Firefly to the Firebird, which was to fit a water pump. The other changes to the engine was they increased the bore to 73mm. Steering box, which is a little bit controversial at the moment. You've got 4 grease points at this side, 3 at the other side, which do things such as the spring shackles, brake cables, clutch operating mechanism and so forth. The bronze bodied semi-downdraft SU carburettor, doesn't have an air cleaner, just has a flame trap. This and that are the original jacking handle for the built-in jacks, which is one behind each rear spring, sorry, underneath each rear spring, and one on the beam axle.
So how do you find it drives then, Mick? It's driving beautifully just now, I've got to say.
This car drives very well. We've got the all synchronous gearbox, we've got the Alvis self-servo brakes, basically a speed 20 beam axle chassis, which is very rigid.
So she's pulling very well.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And what do you think about these people that say that the Firebird's a dog then?
Well, they've never driven one, have they? I've driven all sorts of cars, all sorts of Alvis cars, and I find the Firebird to be grossly underrated. I find most Alvis four-cylinder cars are underrated, and the problem is people don't realise that they do have a respectable performance. On the plus side, we have ease of maintenance, low cost maintenance, and the pluses outweigh the negatives going.
How do you find it drives in the motorway?
Motorway, this particular car with the high ratio diff is geared at about 19.4 miles per thousand. And it's quite happy to cruise at sort of 55, 60 miles an hour on the motorway, no problem at all. We travelled up today around between 3,200 to 3,500 revs, no problem whatsoever.
And the brakes seem to be pulling up very well.
The brakes are very, very good with the self-servo action on them, 14-inch drums, good braking area in relation to the weight of the car. I stripped the engine basically just to check it over. Everything was fine, satisfactory. So it was assembled back as it was, with the exception I put new valves in it.